Imagine a world lit by a glow no one could explain. At the turn of the 20th century, when lamps and candles still ruled the night, a strange light shimmered quietly in a darkened lab in Paris. It was not fire. It was not electricity. It was something entirely new, something pulled from the very heart of the earth. At the center of this discovery was a woman whose name would become legend, Marie Curie. She was not born into wealth or privilege. She was not given easy access to education. Yet she pushed through poverty, prejudice, and grief to uncover secrets that would change the course of science and medicine forever. Her life reads like a story of royalty, not the kind crowned in castles, but the kind crowned with knowledge. Some called her the Queen of Science, others the Radium Royal, a woman who turned obscurity into brilliance and sacrifice into discovery. But behind the luminous glow of radium was a personal cost so high that it still casts shadows today. What makes her story truly extraordinary is not only what she discovered, but how she lived, unyielding, curious, and devoted to truth, even when it came at great risk. Welcome to Words of Time. In this video, we will explore the life and legacy of Marie Curie, from her humble beginnings in partitioned Poland to her groundbreaking discoveries in Paris, her wartime heroism, and the enduring glow of her influence on science and humanity. Stay with us as we uncover not just the facts of her life, but the human story behind the radium enigma, a tale of brilliance, struggle, and a legacy that still inspires today. Marie Curie's story begins not in the laboratories of Paris, but in Warsaw, in a country under Russian rule where opportunities for women were slim and often non-existent. Born as Maria Sklodowska in the late 19th century, she came into a world that seemed determined to confine her dreams. In Poland, universities were closed to women, and science was viewed as a field meant for men. Yet even as a young girl, she displayed a sharp curiosity and a quiet determination to learn. She absorbed knowledge wherever she could find it, often reading her father's scientific instruments as though they were novels. For her, science was never just an academic pursuit, but a way of making sense of the hidden truths of the world. This passion, deeply rooted in her character, would one day transform not only her life, but also the way humanity understood matter itself. When she moved to Paris in her early 20s, she was not greeted with comfort or security. She lived in a small, freezing attic, often skipping meals to save money for her education at the Sorbonne. There she pursued mathematics and physics, subjects dominated by men, where a woman's presence was either ignored or underestimated. Her struggles were not only financial but cultural and personal. She was an immigrant in a city that did not always welcome outsiders, and a woman in spaces that quietly suggested she did not belong. Yet despite the challenges, she thrived academically. She graduated with top honors in physics, followed later by mathematics. These achievements alone would have been remarkable, but they were only the first steps of a much larger journey. It was in Paris that she met Pierre Curie, a physicist who shared her devotion to scientific truth and her refusal to conform to convention. Their partnership was not only intellectual, but also deeply personal. They married, and unlike many couples of their time, their relationship was built on equality of the mind as well as of the heart. They worked side by side in their modest laboratory, exploring the mysteries of radiation, a phenomenon that had just begun to intrigue scientists at the close of the 19th century. Pierre once said that Marie had opened a new world to him, and indeed together they ventured into realms of science no one had yet dared to tread. The discovery of polonium and radium was the result of long, grueling hours of labor. Their laboratory conditions were harsh. They worked in a shed with poor ventilation. Handling substances they did not yet understand were dangerous. They processed tons of pitchblende, an ore rich in uranium, breaking it down painstakingly to isolate substances that gave off strange, invisible rays. At the end of countless days and nights of stirring, boiling, and refining, they extracted tiny, glowing specks of radium. This glowing element seemed almost alive, casting a faint light in the darkness, as though it were a new form of fire drawn out of the earth itself. Marie Curie named polonium after her homeland, a tribute to the Poland that had been taken from her by foreign powers. It was a gesture that showed how deeply her national identity was tied to her work, even as she lived in exile. Radium, on the other hand, became the substance that defined her legacy. Its properties fascinated and confounded the scientific world. It released energy without any external stimulus, challenging the very understanding of matter and energy. It appeared eternal, unchanging, endlessly emitting rays that could pass through solid objects. For the scientific community of the time, this was nothing short of revolutionary. Recognition came swiftly. The Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Marie and Pierre Curie, alongside Henri Becquerel, for their work on radiation. What was remarkable here was not just the science, but the fact that Marie, a woman, was placed on equal footing with her male colleagues. She became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, and later, the first person ever to win two, this time in chemistry, for her discovery of radium and polonium. No one else had ever achieved such a feat. These honors made her a symbol, not just of intellectual brilliance, but of the power of perseverance against prejudice. Yet, behind the accolades, her life remained difficult. Pierre's untimely death in a street accident left her devastated, suddenly alone with two daughters and the responsibility of continuing their shared work. Her grief was immense, but rather than retreat, she pressed forward. She took Pierre's professorship at the Sorbonne, becoming the first woman to teach there. Her lectures were attended by curious crowds who wanted to see this extraordinary woman speak, not only because of her discoveries, but because she stood at the front of a lecture hall in a space previously reserved only for men. Her work with radium extended beyond the laboratory. During the First World War, she understood that her knowledge of X-rays could save lives on the battlefield. She organized mobile radiography units, training young women, including her daughter Erin, to operate them. Thousands of soldiers were treated thanks to these efforts. Here, her science was no longer confined to research papers, but became a practical tool that eased suffering in real time. Despite her achievements, Marie Curie was often misunderstood or even mistreated. She faced skepticism and hostility, particularly when her personal life became public. She endured scandal after being falsely accused of an affair that was sensationalized in the press. Instead of being celebrated solely for her intellect, she was subjected to the same social scrutiny that diminished many women of her era. Yet she endured, never allowing public opinion to define her worth or her work. The irony of her story lies in the very substance that defined her legacy. Radium, the element she painstakingly isolated, was both a gift and a curse. It fascinated the world, used in medicine, industry, and even beauty products, but its dangers were not fully understood. Marie Curie herself suffered from prolonged exposure, often carrying radium in small bottles in her pockets, unaware of the toll it would take on her body. Her notebooks, even today, remain radioactive and require protective measures to handle. She died of aplastic anemia, a condition linked to radiation exposure, making her both a pioneer and, in a way, a victim of her own groundbreaking discoveries. To call her simply a scientist would be to overlook much of her story. Marie Curie lived at the intersection of science, history, and human resilience. She was a mother who raised daughters while conducting world-changing research. She was a patriot who never forgot her homeland, naming a new element in its honor. She was a teacher who broke barriers for women in academia. She was a widow who carried on her late husband's legacy while building her own. Her life, layered with personal trials and triumphs, reveals not only the brilliance of her intellect, but also the strength of her spirit. What makes her story almost like a modern-day royal tale is the way she commanded respect and admiration not by birthright or inheritance, but by the sheer force of her mind. The Queen of the Elements, as she has sometimes been called, did not reign in a palace but in a laboratory, with glassware and mineral samples as her court. Her crown was not of jewels, but of glowing discoveries that reshaped the way humanity understood matter itself. Unlike royalty, her legacy is not confined to a family line but belongs to all of humanity, as her discoveries continue to influence medicine, energy, and scientific thought even now. When we reflect on Marie Curie's life, what stands out is not only her extraordinary list of accomplishments, but also the way she embodied persistence in the face of limitation. She made visible what had been invisible, both in science and in society. She revealed the hidden forces within atoms, while also proving that women could claim equal space in intellectual fields. Her life demonstrates that progress often begins with those who refuse to accept the boundaries placed upon them. Her story resonates today because it reminds us that true revolutions do not always come with fanfare. Sometimes they begin quietly, with a young woman in Warsaw determined to read books in secret, or with a widow continuing her experiments against all odds. Marie Curie was not driven by fame or wealth, but by an unyielding desire to understand the natural world. That desire pushed her to defy the conventions of her time, and in doing so, left a legacy that cannot be measured by awards alone. The radium enigma, as it has often been described, was not only about an element, but about the life of the woman who brought it to light. It symbolizes both the brilliance and the danger of discovery, the triumphs and the sacrifices of a life devoted to science. In her, we find not just the tale of a scientist, but the story of a groundbreaking individual who changed the fabric of modern thought. Marie Curie remains an enduring figure, a reminder that even in a world that doubted her, she found a way to illuminate it. The unseen parts of Marie Curie's story reveal as much about her strength as the discoveries that made her famous. The brilliance of her scientific work often hides the cost at which it came, not only to her health, but also to her personal life. When people think of her, they often picture a woman standing beside glowing substances in a laboratory, a figure of almost mythical achievement. Yet the reality was more complicated. Her journey was filled with long periods of exhaustion, loneliness, grief, and misunderstanding. These sacrifices, often invisible to those around her, are what make her story deeply human and relatable, even to those who may never set foot in a laboratory. Her daily life as a researcher was not the glamorous portrait of success that awards and ceremonies might suggest. Much of her work took place in grim conditions, in a shed that barely resembled a proper laboratory. The roof leaked when it rained, and the winters were bitterly cold. Marie Curie spent endless hours stirring cauldrons of pitchblende, her body aching and her hands rough from the labor. Science, for her, was not just intellectual but physical. She worked with primitive equipment, carrying out repetitive tasks that many would have found unbearable. While others might imagine the joy of discovering a new element, she endured the endless drudgery that preceded those breakthroughs, pushing herself far beyond ordinary limits. There was also the toll of being constantly under scrutiny. As one of the few women in a male-dominated field, she had to endure skepticism and doubt at nearly every step. Even her Nobel Prize in Physics was nearly awarded only to her husband and Henri Becquerel, with her name excluded. It was Marie Curie who insisted that her contributions were equal and demanded her recognition. Without his intervention, history might have written her out of the very discovery that defined her career. This reminder of how close she came to invisibility speaks to the constant battles she fought, not against scientific obstacles alone, but also against cultural prejudice. Her sacrifices also extended into her private life. After Pierre's death, she was left to raise two daughters while sustaining a career that demanded nearly all her energy. She never shied away from her role as a mother, but balancing it with groundbreaking research was a struggle few could understand. Often she carried her grief silently, burying herself in her work, though the loss never truly left her. She was known to sit by Pierre's grave even in harsh weather, as though trying to remain connected to the partner who had shared her passion and her burdens. Her determination to continue their research was not simply a professional duty, but an act of love, a way of honoring the life they had built together. The years following Pierre's death also brought a painful chapter that revealed the fragility of public admiration. When her relationship with physicist Paul Langevin became public knowledge, newspapers exploded with scandal. She was painted not as a brilliant scientist, but as a woman accused of dishonor, her private life dragged through the press with cruelty. Crowds gathered outside her home shouting insults, and she was urged to leave France. Even her achievements were questioned in light of gossip. This episode cut deeply because it showed how quickly society was willing to reduce her identity to a stereotype, dismissing her intellect in favor of scandal. Yet, in the midst of this humiliation, she attended the ceremony in Stockholm to accept her second Nobel Prize, standing firm in her dignity. The hidden cost of her work was also etched into her body. Marie Curie did not understand the full dangers of radiation, nor did anyone at the time. She handled radium without protective measures, often storing it close to her, marveling at its glow in the dark. The slow damage it caused was invisible but relentless, weakening her health over years. She experienced fatigue, pain, and eventually the illness that would end her life. Her commitment to discovery meant that she willingly exposed herself to risks she could not name, driven by a vision larger than personal safety. Even in her suffering, she saw her work not as a mistake, but as a duty to knowledge and to the betterment of humanity. Her sacrifices extended beyond her own generation. The financial rewards of her discoveries were minimal, as she refused to patent radium. While this decision meant she struggled with limited means throughout her life, she believed that knowledge should be shared freely with the world. It was a choice that reflected her values, placing collective progress above personal gain. Yet it also meant she carried the burden of trying to secure resources for her research while others profited from her breakthroughs. Few people would choose such a path, and yet she did so without regret, guided by a sense of responsibility that overshadowed her own needs. The unseen promise of her life is found in how she carried these struggles with grace and resilience. Her journey was not simply about producing discoveries, but about showing what it means to pursue truth despite hardship. She illuminated not just atoms, but the human capacity to endure. In her laboratory, she stood at the frontier of knowledge, but in her personal life, she experienced the same fears, sorrows, and doubts that shape all human stories. That combination makes her legacy both extraordinary and deeply relatable. Her struggles remind us that behind every great achievement, there are sacrifices often invisible to history. The glowing test tubes, the awards, the public honors. All of these were balanced by sleepless nights, financial struggles, personal losses, and battles with prejudice. The radium enigma is therefore not just about a mysterious element, but about a woman who revealed its power while carrying the hidden weight of her own trials. To understand her fully is to see both sides of her life. The celebrated figure who changed science forever, and the unseen individual who bore the quiet costs of that greatness. The thread that connects her unseen sacrifices to her monumental discoveries is the belief that truth is worth any price. She lived her life as though knowledge itself demanded loyalty, even when that loyalty came at great personal cost. This is what makes her journey so compelling. It was not only about what she gave to science, but about what she gave of herself. In her sacrifices we find a promise, one that continues to inspire, that the pursuit of discovery, though demanding, can bring light to the darkest corners of the unknown, and that even the most hidden struggles can create legacies that shine across generations. Marie Curie's story is most often told through the lens of her discoveries, her double Nobel Prizes, and her pioneering presence in a scientific world that had no place for women. But to understand her brilliance, it is necessary to trace the improbable path she followed from her childhood in Poland, where dreams of education were constantly restrained, to her arrival in Paris, where those dreams could finally begin to take shape. The sacrifices she made in these early years reveal not just the contours of her character, but also the deep hunger for knowledge that sustained her through hardships that might have broken others. She was born Maria Sklodowska in Warsaw in the year 1867, in a Poland that had long been partitioned between the Russian Empire, Prussia, and Austria. The Poland she knew was one where her culture and language were suppressed by foreign rule. Even in the classroom, Russian was forced upon her, and patriotic expression had to be muted or hidden. Her father, a teacher of physics and mathematics, filled their home with a sense of curiosity and learning, keeping scientific instruments within reach. Yet financial difficulties plagued the family. Her mother, a teacher and headmistress, fell ill with tuberculosis and died when Maria was only 10 years old, a loss that left a permanent wound on her young spirit. Even in this grief, she clung to books and study as a kind of refuge. Education for women in Poland was severely limited. Universities did not admit women, so Maria pursued learning through underground classes, often called the Flying University, which operated in secret to avoid detection by Russian authorities. These gatherings of young, idealistic students and teachers were illegal but vital, offering women like Maria a chance to grow intellectually in a society that denied them that right. It was there that her hunger for knowledge deepened, and where she began to imagine a future beyond the restrictions imposed on her. Still, opportunities for formal study were scarce, and poverty stood in the way. To support herself and help her sister Bronia pursue her own education in Paris, Maria worked as a governess for several years, teaching children of wealthier families while denying herself the education she so desperately craved. She promised Bronia that once she was established in Paris as a doctor, she would return the favor and help Maria study there as well. During these long years of work in the countryside, Maria endured loneliness and frustration, her intellect confined by circumstances. She studied on her own whenever possible, working through advanced mathematics and physics texts late into the night after finishing her duties. It was a life of delayed gratification, but one that revealed her remarkable endurance and devotion to learning. Finally, in 1891, she moved to Paris, enrolling at the Sorbonne under the French version of her name, Marie. Paris was both liberating and overwhelming. She was free to pursue her studies, yet she was unprepared for the hardships of living in a foreign city with little money. She rented a small, poorly heated attic room, often going hungry to save money for books and tuition. Winters were especially brutal, with her breath freezing in the air inside her room. Despite these conditions, she excelled academically, earning a degree in physics with the highest marks in her class, followed later by a degree in mathematics. Her brilliance, paired with her resilience, made her stand out even in the competitive environment of the Sorbonne. It was during this period that she met Marie Curie, a physicist working on crystals and magnetism. Pierre was known for his quiet, introspective nature, a man of deep thought but limited ambition. When he met Marie, he found in her not just a companion, but an intellectual equal, someone whose intensity and drive matched his own. Their bond was immediate, rooted as much in their shared scientific curiosity as in mutual respect and admiration. Marie at first resisted his marriage proposal, uncertain whether she should commit to a life in France when her heart still yearned for her homeland. Yet Pierre's devotion and the depth of their connection won her over, and they were married in 1895. Their life together was not one of luxury, but of partnership. They lived modestly, often riding bicycles together in the countryside, their bond strengthened by both affection and the joy of discovery. Pierre provided not only love, but also the encouragement Marie needed to pursue her work without hesitation. It was in this environment of equality that their most important scientific breakthroughs were born. In the late 19th century, the scientific world was buzzing with the discovery of X-rays by Wilhelm Röntgen and the work of Henri Becquerel, who had found that uranium salts emitted mysterious rays that could fog photographic plates. Marie Curie chose this phenomenon as the subject of her doctoral research. Using sensitive instruments that Pierre and his brother Jacques had developed years earlier, she began to measure the intensity of these emissions. What she found was astonishing. The emissions were not dependent on the chemical form of uranium, but seemed to come from the atom itself. This idea challenged the conventional view of matter, suggesting that atoms were not indivisible but contained hidden forces. Together, Marie and Pierre pursued this mystery with relentless determination. They turned their attention to a mineral called pitchblende, which seemed to emit stronger radiation than pure uranium. They suspected that the ore contained new, undiscovered elements. Their laboratory was hardly worthy of the name, little more than a shed with poor ventilation, cracked walls, and a leaking roof. The conditions were primitive, with equipment so basic that much of their work had to be improvised. Yet they pressed on, working long hours in harsh conditions. Marie once described the lab as a shed wooden, tarred, and ill-lit by the glass windows, yet it was here that the foundations of modern physics were laid. The process of isolating new elements was grueling. They handled tons of pitchblende, breaking it down through crushing, dissolving, boiling, and crystallizing. The work was exhausting and required physical strength as well as precision. For months they stirred great vats of material, reducing it step by step, hoping to extract the hidden substances. Their persistence was extraordinary, fueled by conviction and the thrill of the unknown. In July of 1898, they announced the discovery of polonium, named by Marie in honor of her homeland, which still remained under foreign control. Later that year, they discovered another, even more remarkable element, radium. Unlike anything known before, radium emitted an energy that seemed inexhaustible, glowing faintly in the dark. The birth of these discoveries was not a sudden moment of revelation, but the outcome of painstaking, backbreaking labor. The Curies worked in obscurity, with little recognition at first, enduring physical exhaustion and health problems from their exposure to radiation. They did not yet understand the dangers, and they handled these substances directly, carrying samples in their pockets, marveling at their glow without realizing the damage it inflicted on their bodies. Despite the hardships, their discoveries sent shockwaves through the scientific community, opening entirely new fields of research and changing humanity's understanding of the natural world. The story of polonium and radium was not just about scientific progress, but about personal devotion. Marie and Pierre's synergy was at the heart of it. Their marriage was not only a private partnership, but also a professional collaboration that broke traditional boundaries. At a time when women were often denied recognition for their work, Pierre consistently acknowledged Marie as his equal, insisting that her contributions were central to their shared achievements. It was this unity of purpose, this fusion of intellect and determination, that gave rise to discoveries that reshaped science forever. From poverty and loss in Poland to hunger and hardship in Paris, from the modest beginnings of their partnership to the glowing light of radium, Marie Curie's path was marked by extraordinary sacrifices. These sacrifices, largely unseen by the world at the time, are what made the brilliance of her discoveries possible. Her story reminds us that behind every breakthrough lies a foundation of perseverance, hardship, and human resilience. She did not simply find new elements. She revealed new possibilities for what a life of dedication could achieve. Her journey from Warsaw to Paris, from Maria Sklodowska to Marie Curie, stands as one of the most compelling narratives in the history of science, a tale of brilliance born from struggle and of discovery fueled by sacrifice. When radium emerged from the obscurity of a crude laboratory in a Parisian shed into the broader consciousness of the world, it was not just a scientific achievement. It was a revelation, something almost mystical in its impact. The element glowed faintly in the dark, casting an otherworldly light that seemed alive. In an age where the mysteries of nature still carried the aura of wonder, radium appeared like a treasure pulled from the hidden depths of the earth, radiating its secret without ceasing. To scientists, it was an open door to new realms of knowledge. To the public, it was a marvel that bordered on magic. The properties of radium were unlike anything seen before. Unlike ordinary substances that could be changed or activated only under specific conditions, radium emitted its strange rays constantly, without any external cause. It defied expectations by showing that atoms, once thought indivisible and stable, contained forces that could release energy endlessly. The discovery disrupted established scientific principles and laid the foundation for what would later become atomic physics. But beyond the scientific community, radium's glow captured imaginations. In the darkness of their small lab, Marie and Pierre Curie marveled at tiny samples that shimmered faintly like embers that never died. To them, it was more than a material, it was a glimpse into the invisible architecture of the universe. Public fascination with radium quickly grew. Newspapers wrote about it with awe, and soon it became a symbol of modernity and progress. Its luminous glow seemed to embody both beauty and power, a material that was as enchanting as it was mysterious. Scientists envisioned its potential in medicine, particularly in treating cancer, as its rays had the ability to destroy diseased tissue. Clinics began to experiment with radium therapy, and patients placed their hopes in this strange element that seemed to hold healing power. To ordinary people, radium felt like a miracle hidden in the earth, now revealed by human determination. But fascination carried risks as well. Without a full understanding of its dangers, radium began to be used in ways that, from today's perspective, seem shocking. It was added to cosmetics, to drinks, to household items, marketed as a source of vitality and youth. Small vials of radium water were sold as health tonics, and glow-in-the-dark paints used radium to create shining clock dials and instruments. For the early 20th century, radium was not just science, it was fashion, commerce, and spectacle. And at the center of it all stood Marie Curie, the woman whose persistence had unlocked its mystery. Recognition followed, though it was not immediate nor without struggle. In 1903, Marie and Pierre Curie, along with Henri Becquerel, were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for their work on radiation. At first, Marie's name was nearly left off the nomination, as the committee initially intended to honor only Pierre and Becquerel. It was only through Pierre's insistence, his clear acknowledgement of her equal role, that Marie's contributions were properly recognized. This moment was more than a personal triumph. It was a breakthrough for women in science, proof that their work could stand beside that of men in the highest echelons of recognition. Marie Curie's fame, however, was not confined to one achievement. A few years later, in 1911, she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for her discovery of polonium and radium and her work in isolating and studying these elements. She became the first person, and remains one of the very few, to have won 2 Nobel Prizes in different scientific fields. This was an achievement without precedent, and it solidified her place in history. She had not only contributed to one branch of science, but had transformed 2, physics and chemistry alike. The weight of these honors was immense. For a woman who had once studied in secret in Warsaw, who had endured poverty in Paris, and who had worked in near-obscure conditions with her husband, these awards were not just recognition but validation of years of struggle. They brought her international fame, yet they also brought her a heavier burden. With the Nobel Prizes came public attention, scrutiny, and expectations. She became not only a scientist but also a symbol, an icon of intellectual triumph and female perseverance. Yet behind the glow of her discoveries and the grandeur of her awards, the personal costs began to emerge. The very element that had brought her fame carried invisible dangers. Prolonged exposure to radium's radiation, which she and Pierre handled without protection, slowly eroded their health. At the time, no one fully understood the risks. They carried small samples in their pockets, kept them in their desk drawers, and marveled at their glow late into the night. Radium seemed like a companion, a wonder they had coaxed from nature. But in truth, it was silently exacting a price. Marie often worked long hours with the substances, stirring and boiling pitchblende in heavy iron cauldrons, inhaling fumes, and handling radioactive materials with bare hands. She wrote of her exhaustion, her physical weakness, though she did not yet connect it with her work. Pierre, too, began to feel the effects, burns on his skin, constant fatigue, but their passion for discovery kept them from seeing these symptoms as warnings. Instead, they pressed on, convinced that their work would open new doors for humanity. The years of research took a toll in other ways as well. The Curies lived modestly, with little financial benefit from their discoveries, since they chose not to patent radium. Marie believed firmly that knowledge should be shared freely, that no individual should profit from a discovery that could advance humanity as a whole. This decision left her struggling to fund her laboratory, even as industries and clinics across the world began using radium for various purposes. It was a sacrifice that underscored her character. The pursuit of science for truth and progress, not for wealth. As Marie Curie's reputation grew, so too did her responsibilities. She was now seen as a leader in a rapidly expanding field, and the demand for her guidance, her lectures, and her involvement increased. Yet with every new honor and every new responsibility, her body carried the hidden damage of her prolonged exposure to radiation. Her notebooks, her personal effects, even today, remain dangerously radioactive, a permanent reminder of the unseen cost of her work. The image of Marie Curie during this period is one of duality. On one hand, she stood at the peak of scientific recognition, the only person in history at the time to have achieved such unprecedented honors. On the other hand, she bore the unseen burden of health challenges that foreshadowed the sacrifices yet to come. The radium reign was truly a golden age of discovery, an age that illuminated the path forward for physics, chemistry, and medicine. But golden light, as her life showed, can also cast long shadows. The fascination of radium, the awe of its properties, the grandeur of 2 Nobel Prizes, all of these elements form the visible story of Marie Curie. Yet beneath this brilliance lies the quieter, more haunting reality of what it cost her. As she moved into the next chapters of her life, the duality of wonder and sacrifice, of triumph and suffering, would become inseparable. It is this tension between glory and burden that makes her story not only extraordinary, but profoundly human. When the First World War erupted in 1914, Europe was suddenly thrown into chaos, and the questions of science and discovery were pushed aside by the urgency of survival. Yet for Marie Curie, the war did not mean the end of her mission. If anything, it became a new stage upon which her dedication to humanity could shine, though at great cost to her already fragile health. The radium she had uncovered was now locked away for safekeeping, but her knowledge of physics and radiation found a new, urgent purpose. Instead of remaining in her laboratory, she stepped into the battlefield, determined to bring the power of science to the service of human life in the most immediate way possible. The weapon she chose was not destructive. Unlike those who would later see in atomic science the potential for devastation, Curie saw in radiation the possibility of healing. She recognized that X-rays, discovered just a few years earlier, could be life-saving in war. With X-ray imaging, surgeons could locate bullets, shrapnel, and fractures within wounded soldiers' bodies, making their work far more precise and effective. Without such technology, many soldiers faced amputations or slow deaths from wounds that could not be properly treated. For Curie, who had always believed that science should serve humanity, the war became an opportunity to turn knowledge into direct aid for the suffering. She worked tirelessly to develop mobile radiology units that could be driven to the front lines. These vans, soon to be known as Petites Curies, carried X-ray equipment powered by car engines and small generators. The concept was revolutionary. Instead of transporting countless wounded soldiers back to large hospitals far from the front, doctors could now diagnose injuries immediately and begin treatment without delay. The Petites Curies brought science to the trenches, carrying light into the darkest places of war. Marie Curie did not simply design these units from afar. She was directly involved in every stage of their development. She studied automobile mechanics, electricity, and radiology to ensure that the machines worked properly. Then she trained herself to drive, something unusual for a woman at the time, so that she could personally bring the vehicles to the front. Even more remarkable, she trained nurses and volunteers, many of them young women, in the operation of the X-ray units. She wanted to make sure the technology could be used effectively and safely under battlefield conditions. Despite her declining health, weakened by years of radiation exposure, she traveled repeatedly to dangerous war zones. She stood beside doctors in makeshift operating rooms, helping position soldiers under the X-ray beams, reading the images, and showing surgeons where to cut and where to avoid. Often she worked in extreme conditions, mud, cold, shellfire in the distance, yet she never retreated. To the wounded soldiers, she was not only a scientist, but an angel of mercy. Her daughter Erin, still very young, accompanied her on these missions and learned to operate the equipment as well. Together they represented a new vision of service. Women of science putting themselves directly in harm's way to save lives. The numbers were staggering. Over the course of the war, Curie established more than 20 mobile radiology units and oversaw the installation of nearly 200 permanent X-ray facilities in hospitals across France. Thousands upon thousands of wounded soldiers owed their lives and their limbs to these innovations. She trained around 150 women to operate the machines, creating a core of radiology workers who carried her vision into practice across the country. Yet despite the immense impact, she asked for no recognition, no reward. She saw this work not as a choice but as a duty, an extension of the responsibility she had always felt as a scientist. This wartime chapter of Curie's life highlights a different kind of heroism. It was not about discovery in the quiet of a laboratory, nor about glory on the stage of international awards. It was about direct, unseen service to human life in the grimmest of circumstances. She drove through muddy roads, braved the proximity of battle, and worked until exhaustion overcame her. All the while, her health deteriorated further from the repeated exposure to X-rays and the lingering effects of radiation from earlier years. But she pressed forward, unwilling to place her own needs above those of the soldiers who might be saved. The Petites Curies were not celebrated in the newspapers the way radium had been. They did not glow in the dark or capture the imagination of the fashionable elite. Yet their impact was immeasurable, and they revealed the true nature of Marie Curie's character. She was never content with knowledge as an end in itself. To her, science without service was incomplete. The war gave her the chance to embody that principle in the most direct way possible. Her efforts left behind a legacy not only of technological innovation, but also of human selflessness. The Petites Curies were the beginning of what would later become the widespread use of medical imaging, a cornerstone of modern medicine. Every X-ray taken today, every diagnosis made possible by peering inside the human body without cutting it open, carries within it a part of the work she initiated during those desperate years of war. But beyond the technology, her example set a standard of moral responsibility. That scientists must be willing to place their knowledge at the service of humanity, even at personal risk. The sacrifices she made during the war cannot be separated from the larger story of her life. By this time, her health was already fragile, and the added exposure to radiation on the battlefield only worsened her condition. Yet she never once sought to shield herself or to retreat into safety. Her sense of duty was stronger than her fear, and her compassion for the suffering outweighed her concern for her own well-being. This period also reveals how seamlessly her life wove together science, motherhood, and service. Erin, her daughter, stood beside her at the front, learning not only about X-rays but about dedication, courage, and sacrifice. Erin would later become a Nobel laureate herself, carrying forward the Curie legacy. But during the war, she was simply a daughter learning from her mother's example that science was not only about discovery, but also about responsibility. When the war ended in 1918, Marie Curie returned to her laboratory, but she did so transformed. She had shown that science could serve not only knowledge, but life itself in its most fragile moments. She had lived through the devastation of war, and had chosen to fight it not with weapons, but with healing. The Petites Curies faded from public memory in the years that followed, overshadowed by the glamour of radium and the prestige of Nobel Prizes. Yet they may have been her most selfless contribution, a gift to humanity forged not in discovery but in sacrifice. The story of her wartime efforts connects deeply with the broader theme of her life, that progress always comes with unseen costs, and that the true measure of greatness lies not only in brilliance but also in generosity. The radium that had brought her fame was slowly destroying her, yet she gave what strength she had left to the service of others. The war revealed her not just as a scientist of rare genius, but as a human being of extraordinary compassion and courage. In the trenches and field hospitals of the First World War, Marie Curie showed the world a different kind of radiance. Not the glow of radium in a glass vial, but the quiet light of selflessness, of a woman who placed herself between suffering and hope, determined that knowledge should save rather than destroy. It is this light, perhaps more than any other, that continues to define her legacy. The later years of Marie Curie's life carry a quiet gravity, for they represent not only the culmination of her achievements, but also the slow unfolding of the price she had paid for them. By the time the First World War had ended and her petites Curies had saved countless lives, her health was in irreversible decline. The symptoms were not sudden but gradual, creeping into her life as fatigue, weakness, and bouts of illness. The truth, though not fully understood then, was that the very elements she had so lovingly coaxed from the earth, the radium she had carried in her pockets and admired in the dark, were slowly destroying her. Radiation was still a mystery to the world at large. Its power was viewed with awe, its dangers only dimly perceived. Marie Curie, who had handled radium daily for decades without gloves or shielding, who had spent nights writing notes beside glowing test tubes, was among the first victims of its unseen cruelty. Her bone marrow weakened, her body struggled to regenerate blood, and she developed what would later be recognized as aplastic anemia, a condition directly linked to prolonged radiation exposure. At the time, doctors could not offer a cure. She was already deeply fatigued by her years of wartime service and the burdens of research, but now her very cells were breaking down under the invisible weight of radiation's damage. And yet, she did not surrender. Even in her declining health, she continued to work, to teach, and to guide others. Her laboratory, the Radium Institute in Paris, had by this time become a center of cutting-edge research. There, students from around the world came to learn not only about the new sciences of radioactivity and nuclear physics, but also about the ethic of dedication that she embodied. Her own daughter Erin, alongside Frederick Joliot, would later continue this work, earning a Nobel Prize in chemistry in the 1930s for their discovery of artificial radioactivity. In this way, her intellectual lineage was as enduring as her biological one, and her vision carried forward through generations. Marie Curie's death in July of 1934 was marked by both sorrow and reverence. She passed away quietly in a sanatorium in the French Alps, far from the laboratory that had defined her life. There was no dramatic moment, no final experiment, only the slow silencing of a life that had burned with intensity for nearly 7 decades. Her funeral was modest, as she had wished, without pomp or grandeur, though the weight of her contributions was known across the world. She was laid to rest beside Pierre in a small cemetery in Sceaux, the town where they had once lived simply as a young couple devoted to science and each other. The tragedy of her death is inseparable from the triumph of her life. Unlike many others, she paid with her own body for the knowledge she brought forth. Her notebooks, her letters, her very clothing remain radioactive even today, sealed in lead-lined boxes, untouchable without protective gear. They are relics of both discovery and sacrifice, reminders that the pursuit of knowledge can carry hidden costs. Marie Curie became not only the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the first person to win 2 in different sciences, but also one of the first martyrs to radiation, though she never saw herself in that way. She had always accepted her path as one of service, not of self-preservation. Her legacy, however, extends far beyond the science of radium and polonium. She stands as a symbol of resilience and determination for women in science, then and now. In an age when women were excluded from universities, from academies, from recognition, she carved a path with sheer brilliance and persistence. She became the first female professor at the Sorbonne, opening doors for those who came after her. Her life demonstrated that women were not only capable of participating in science, but capable of leading it, redefining its frontiers. For countless young women who would follow in her footsteps, she became a beacon, proof that barriers could be broken, that intellect knew no gender. Marie Curie's relentless pursuit of knowledge also raised profound ethical questions that continue to shape science today. The elements she discovered offered both healing and harm. Radium became a tool in the fight against cancer, pioneering new forms of medical treatment, but it also found its way into commercial products that endangered lives. Later, the understanding of atomic energy would lead to weapons of unprecedented destructive power, a legacy she never intended, but one inseparable from the science she helped create. Her life embodies the dual-edged nature of discovery. That knowledge can be both salvation and danger, depending on how humanity chooses to use it. In this way, her story continues to challenge scientists to reflect on responsibility, on the consequences of their work, and on the ethical obligations tied to progress. She has often been called the Queen of Science, or even the Radium Royal, not because she sought titles, but because she embodied a kind of intellectual sovereignty. Her reign was not over nations, but over atoms, not through inherited power, but through earned brilliance. She wore no crown, yet the glow of radium was hers alone to reveal. Her legacy shines not in palaces, but in hospitals, research institutes, and classrooms, wherever her discoveries continue to heal, to inspire, and to illuminate the unknown. She remains an icon not only of intellect, but of dedication, of a life lived in pursuit of truth without compromise. For today's world, Marie Curie's example remains strikingly relevant. Science now faces challenges as complex and urgent as any in her time. Climate change, pandemics, the ethical use of genetic engineering, and artificial intelligence. The questions are different, but the spirit required to face them is the same. Her resilience in the face of poverty, sexism, grief, and illness reminds us that progress demands more than intelligence. It demands courage, perseverance, and selflessness. Her life teaches that true greatness lies not in personal comfort, but in service to humanity, in the willingness to push forward even when the cost is high. And yet, her story also warns us. The unseen sacrifice she made, the illness that slowly claimed her, is a reminder that scientific pursuit must always be tempered with caution and care for human well-being. She did not know the dangers of radiation, but we do now. Her life calls on us not only to admire discovery, but to ensure that its power is harnessed wisely and ethically. This balance between wonder and responsibility, between ambition and humility, is perhaps the most enduring lesson she left behind. Today, her name stands among the most revered in the history of science. Her work has influenced physics, chemistry, medicine, and beyond. Her courage has inspired generations of women and men alike. Her sacrifices have left a permanent mark not only on the pages of history, but on the very tools of modern life, from medical imaging to cancer treatments. She remains both a scientist and a symbol, both a pioneer and a guide. Marie Curie's glow did not end with her death. It endures in every laboratory where young scientists push against the boundaries of the unknown, in every hospital where X-rays and radiation therapies save lives, in every classroom where her story is told to encourage the next generation. It endures in the ethical debates that remind us of the responsibility that comes with discovery. It endures in the quiet resilience of those who, like her, face obstacles yet persist in the pursuit of truth. She is even now the Radium Royal, not for the substance she discovered alone, but for the way she lived her life, with unshakable dedication, with humility, with courage, and with a vision that looked beyond herself to the greater good. Her light continues to shine, not as a relic of the past, but as a guide for the present and the future. In her story, we see not only the brilliance of a scientist, but the depth of a human being who gave everything, her time, her strength, her health, for the promise of knowledge and the service of humanity. That is why her legacy glows still, a light that time cannot extinguish.